Hi, I'm Norm Cummings, a member of the board of the Milford Historical Society, and we're here today for an oral history provided by Betty MacNeal, a longtime Milford resident since 1970, and for many years a teacher in various schools around the country, and for 30 years at Millridge Primary School in Danbury. Welcome, Betty. It's very nice to have you here today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Betty was born in 1936, even though it looks like should have been born many years after that. She was raised in Charlotte, North Carolina during the heart of the Great Depression, one of 6 children of Fredrick and Henrietta Pryor, a mechanic and a housewife. She was schooled in Charlotte, and after finishing there, she began college at North Carolina College in Durham, which is an hour and a half, 2 hours away. But after a year, she transferred to Johnson C. Smith University in Charlotte, from which she earned her degree. She started her career teaching 5th grade in nearby Morganton, North Carolina. After visiting a friend in Yonkers, New York, a year later, Betty moved to New York and gained a position working with teenage girls as a residential treatment center at St. Christopher's School in Dobb's Ferry. Her work there soon earned her a job as a social worker for children in White Plains. A couple years later, Betty took a teaching job in Yonkers. During that time, she met Arnold MacNeal, whom she married. The couple moved to Colorado, where Betty taught in Denver public schools for 4 years. During that time, she and Arnold had their son, Arnold Jr. When her husband accepted a job in Connecticut in 1968, she sought and gained a job at Milford Primary School in Danbury, which started a 30-year tenure teaching elementary school until her retirement in 2000. Along the way, Betty became a resident in Milford, and basically she's lived here for just over 50 years. She still lives there with her son, Arnold Jr. Since her husband's passing in 2001, Betty became active in town as a volunteer within the Milford Social Services Office and also with literacy volunteers, instructing in English as a second language. So we're very pleased and appreciative to have Betty here to offer her thoughts on living as a Black woman in Milford and maybe touching on some of how her growth as a young Black person in other parts of the country, especially in Charlotte, might have lent her perspectives on what it's been like for the rest of her life. So welcome, Betty, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What do you know about your parents' ancestry, the Pryor family dating back before you were born, either your mother or your father, and as far back as you might be aware, back into the 1800s?
My father was born in Gastonia, North Carolina. That's about 25 miles outside of Charlotte. He came from a family of teachers, doctors. His one brother was a pediatrician. They owned a lot of property in Gastonia, and they all lived on the same street where that property was. And pretty soon they named the street Pryor Street. My uncle for a long time had a small business there. My father's aunt taught in the Gastonia public schools, and one of his uncles was a musician and also an actor on stage.
So your father's family was very prominent and really involved in the community and everything.
Right,
in
in Gastonia.
How about the generation before that? Do you know?
I know nothing about it.
Okay, or your mother's family? Do you
My
know?
mother was born and raised in Durham, North Carolina, which is now a part of Charlotte. Mm-hmm. She was born and lived on a farm. Many of her family members lived in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. They were middle of the road income family.
Mm-hmm. So your family, both of your parents came from families that had done well in life,
right,
and were successful.
Right.
So when you started out, you actually, as a child, you had parents who probably raised you with the thoughts that you should be able to do well in life too.
It was my family. Basically, it was the community in which I lived. I lived and was raised in an all-Black community. I went to all-Black schools. I went to all-Black colleges. So I had very limited exposure to white Americans. You'd see them in town or when you went shopping and that kind of thing. But it was the community in which I lived in and the teachers at the high school and the elementary school who encouraged you to do your best. And they always told you you could be anything you wanted to be if you were willing to put the work in.
So you were aware that there was segregation, but you were not affected by it in your personal life.
No.
Is that a fair way to say it?
Yes.
Okay. You were in your 20s. Actually, civil rights movement's been going on forever. Before the Civil War, and certainly actively since then. And there's certainly been, Jim Crow ruled in the South in the early 1900s all the way up through, and still is a problem in a lot of places, including in the Northeast. But when you were in your 20s, that was when the civil rights legislation was passed, and people like Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers, and I don't know if you were aware of John Lewis and what he was involved in doing. I mean, he wasn't in Congress yet, but for people like that, how much awareness did you have when you were early in your teaching career, teaching in the various places you taught? How much awareness were you of the movement to make Black lives better than they were, or to have more of certainly to eliminate segregation in the South?
I was very aware of it. I was aware of the March on Washington, and I knew that there was segregation, but it was something that you knew about, but I was not necessarily affected by it in my personal life. I wanted to go to the March on Washington, but I was not able to go at that time. My sister-in-law went, Wendell's wife.
Wendell MacNeal is her brother-in-law, Arnold's brother. And for those of you who are older, you would well remember Wendell MacNeal as being prominent, being active in starting and being active in the Milford Theater program.
And I remember I was in the car and I lived in Yonkers, and on the radio they announced John F. Kennedy had been killed. And not too long after that, I was in the same situation where Martin Luther King had been killed. And that's when it really, really affected me. I remember after Martin Luther King was killed, I went back to school and my principal said to me something to the effect that two of my best friends had been assassinated.
I think there were many, many people who felt that way.
Right.
And because of their impact on our society and what they were trying to accomplish in the United States, it was very much a black-white issue, but both of them were working towards the same thing.
Right.
So I think that it affected an awful lot of people. When you were, how might your experience as a young Black girl have affected how you evolved as a teacher? And then during 50 years of your life, or now about 2/3 of your life, living in New Milford, how might what you grew up, because you didn't have a lot of trauma as a Black girl, did that make it, do you think, feel like it made any difference to you as a teacher and how you work with your kids in school, or even just your day-to-day life living in New Milford?
Yeah, because in the community that I grew up in, it was similar to the community that I live in now. It was a safe community. There were nurses, teachers, doctors, and everybody knew each other. So the kids couldn't get away with much of anything because it was relayed back to your parents. And in school, everybody, the teachers were very, very encouraging. And so you had people to go to and talk to and counsel you. So the outside world was just that.
During all the years that you taught, did you try to bring in Mill Ridge, there was a mix of students, blacks and whites, and different socioeconomic backgrounds, and you were teaching really young kids, so it wasn't appropriate to be bringing into, a lot of certain issues that you might teach in middle school or high school. But did you teach in such a way that you would try to get everybody to get along? Were there issues with the kids because of the blacks and whites in a mix in your classes, or was that not even a factor?
That was not a factor. I think children are very accepting, and racism or race problems have to be taught or learned by children. Children come in with a clean slate, and I found that it was easy to relate to all the children if you let them know you cared about them. That was very important. And once they knew that you saw them and you heard them, half of the battle was over.
And you felt comfortable, as you said, New Milford was an accepting community, and it was comfortable for you to live here all those years while you were teaching. So when you came home, you went to the grocery store, if you ever came up to the post office when you went into town to vote or whatever else you needed to do, you always felt comfortable in that respect.
Oh, yes, yes.
How about being having taught in Colorado, in New York, and in North Carolina? How would you compare, was there ever any challenge to you regarding in Colorado or in Yonkers?
When I first got a job in Colorado, I was placed in southwest Denver, and it was a totally white community. I had all white children.
Did you find that unusual to be a black teacher put in that community, or was it even something you talked about?
I didn't even think about it.
Good for you.
I just went, and that was the job that I was given. And I found that the parents came in and they were very welcoming, and I felt that it was a good situation. However, my principal I was told, I don't know this as a fact, I was told that when Mrs. Goldman was hired as a principal, the parents did not care for her. So I think, and I don't know this as a fact, but she was very, very hard on me. I could teach the lesson that the teacher next door taught, and it was not good enough. However, I can say in Denver, we had what was called master teachers, who were called coordinators, that used to come into the classroom for new teachers. They came in, they taught you how to organize your classroom, they taught you how to do bulletin boards. They were there to help you. Mm-hmm. My coordinator was June Haas, and she was aware of what was going on. in that situation. So the next thing, she encouraged me to transfer. And the Board of Education, not the Board of Education, the superintendent transferred me to another school. Because I was the last one in, I was the first one out when the enrollment dropped. However, I went to Park Avenue School, and at Park Avenue I had a principal, and I had no problems. It was just at Ellis School.
So you have to think that there had to be some issue there with Mrs. Goldman. Is that what you were?
Yes.
Had to be some issue with her with respect to your race. I mean, it might have been a personal thing.
I don't.
But yeah, and I love that you don't place that automatically on that, but most likely that certainly probably it has a lot of different adverbs, probably was at least some of the case. Now, all the years that you were living in New Milford with you and Arnold, Arnold's experience was a positive one living in New Milford. I guess if it weren't, you probably would have moved.
Yes, yes. You mean my son-in-law?
Your
family.
Your husband, or your son. But
well, I think coming to Connecticut, New Milford, I had Wendell and Tina and their family, and there was also Don and Nan, and
that would be the Tutsons. For those of you who are viewing all these oral histories, two of our interviewees were Donald and Valerie Tutson, who were children of the Don and Nan that she's referring to. So
I wasn't isolated. And we had friends from New York who came up, and we went down, and Arnold's uncle and aunt lived in White Plains. His uncle was Cab Calloway, and his aunt was married to him.
Excuse me again. Cab Calloway, a very prominent entertainer of the middle 20th century,
right,
would be a fair way to describe his career. Very prominent.
So we spent a lot of time there in White Plains, and so it wasn't an issue.
That's wonderful to hear. And that's basically, as we've talked about, our goal here is to find out what it's been like for Blacks living in New Milford, and to have the fact that it's been a positive experience for you and your husband is wonderful. Now, how about for Arnold Jr.? He went to the Milford schools?
He went to the New Milford schools. Arnold was a very quiet child, and he liked school. He never complained. He automatically got up. He never missed school unless he was really sick. He never asked to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
His teachers seemed nice. I can't say that there were any real issues. I don't know of any real issues. I was in touch with his teachers.
Who were his friends? Were his friends a mix of black and white?
Well, his friends were basically the people who lived on Ferry Drive.
Okay. Which included the Tutsons for a while.
Right.
Okay. Have you ever thought about what your life might have been like if you, for the last 50 years you've lived in New Milford and you taught Danbury for 30 of those, have you thought about what life might have been like if you and Arnold had stayed in Colorado or in New York or anywhere else?
I think coming to Connecticut was one of the best things that happened for me. During the time that I taught in Danbury, I was asked to be a part of the union, and I joined the union. I sat on the NEA Danbury board, and then I ran for office for CEA, and I got that position, and I sat on the CEA board of directors, and we had a teacher who was running for NEA president, Bob Chase, and Bob asked me if I would be a part of his campaign. So I agreed to that. I traveled with NEA and CEA. I was the director of women. I can't think of it. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
The Women's Caucus, the Northeast Regional.
Okay. For the NEA.
For the NEA, yes. And that was wonderful. I was asked to be interviewed on Good Morning America, and that was because of NEA.
And you were interviewed?
I was interviewed.
Okay, so you shouldn't have had any problem with coming here to be interviewed if you.
Well, no, that was very different. That was very different.
For sure.
This is.
Yeah, for sure.
So it was a very, very positive experience for me because I got to travel all over the country. I went every year to the convention. That was wonderful. I met a lot of wonderful people. And some of those friends, I have a friend that I've known for 30 years, Karen Horace, who was then the local president in New Milford. And we have a travel club, and those are people that I met through NEA. And we have gone to Europe several times. I think every year we would go on the Viking River cruise. So that was quite nice. The last time was in 2015. So I've seen a lot of Europe. And one year we went, the first time, we went to Greece, and we went to all the Greek islands, which was very
Wow,
nice.
I envy you for that.
Yeah, that was very nice. And these are all friends that I met through NEA and CEA, who live in all across Connecticut.
So, and again, I need to bring it up because it's why we're here. It actually, in no way, no instance, was there any kind of black, white thing, from Karen Horace to anyone else.
These were all white.
You were an accomplished teacher and well respected, regardless of any other factor, which is very cool.
We were friends.
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask you, if you were, and you may very well have been over the years, if you were asked by a young couple who lived in Pennsylvania or North Carolina or Colorado or wherever, but somebody you were familiar with, say they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and they've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and you were asked for your opinion about whether they should move to New Milford, what would you say? And I know you have not been teaching for 20 years, but you're aware of what's going on in the world, and you know New Milford well. What advice would you give them?
Well, I would encourage them to move to New Milford. I'm very comfortable in New Milford. People have asked me, a lot of people are moving south. I have not made that decision to move south because I feel very comfortable. I'm secure in my home. The neighborhood is a nice neighborhood. I'm friendly with all of the neighbors. I have people who check on me and people who come by and see if there's anything that I need.
Sounds like a pretty good situation.
It's a nice situation.
Well, I'm happy for that, and I'm thrilled to hear that you've had a good experience in New Milford and you still consider it a great place. And I know, we're very, we need to be aware that racism exists everywhere, and in a lot of ways in the last few years it's come to the fore. And I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but it's something more people are aware of now. But the fact that New Milford has been a good place for you to live much of your life is a tribute to New Milford and the people here, I think, and also to you. because you're clearly, someone who's open to meet people and interact, which is great. So, do you have other thoughts? Anything we haven't touched on? Anything you want to bring up? Basically, just related to the New Milford experience you've had, and how you might have impacted people here, or vice versa.
I think when the last 5 years, when racism became really in your face,
Right.
I found that going to the grocery store, people seem to be nicer. Don't ask me, but people would talk, they would greet you, and I don't know what that was all about, but it was hello, how are you? And it wasn't just women doing that. It was, everybody.
Probably a little bit of political correctness on their part. A lot of people, if it's white people who are doing that, there probably are an awful lot of people, including me, who feel guilty about the way the world is treating people of not just blacks, but Hispanics and people from Asia, everywhere. Certainly from Mexico, Guatemala, everywhere else. But I think that's an interesting perspective, and I think it's interesting you've noticed it so distinctly, basically since Trump became a factor on our...
Well, I didn't want to bring that up, but I think...
Well, you don't need to. I pretty didn't need to either, but...
I think that had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
People just seem nicer. I mean, you used to go into the grocery store and you nod or what have you, but it was different.
Well, I hope that continues forever and ever. I can't promise that it's going to, but we have a community which is open and interactive, and that so many people have had a good experience here is wonderful, and I'm glad you're one of them. So, did you have anything else you wanted to?
No, that's...
Okay. Well, you've done a great job. We really appreciate that you've done this for us, and it was really interesting hearing all your thoughts. I hope you'll come back to the museum again soon.
I will.
And we would welcome you anytime. So thank you very much, Betty.